part one. We have Lisa Vehe and David Peak from the Equity Task Force, and David is also a counselor at the high school. And they are going to talk about the equity policy. And then our second series is going to be next Tuesday, and that's going to be Dr. John Moore, the IB coordinator at the high school, and he's going to talk about course pathways and where they lead, and about the IB program and the IB levels of instruction. And then our third week is going to be on Monday. So we're going to have 2 Tuesdays and a Monday. So Monday the 15th, we are going to have a program on we have such a good name. Wait, hold. It is, Miata, do you know? Hold on, I've got it right here. It is removing barriers, what instruction looks like in the middle school today. And we're gonna have actual teachers come talk about how they are doing instruction. It's super exciting. And that's gonna be on the 15th. So with that, and then if we have requests like for other information going forward, we can still do, this speaker series can go on into April with other topics, I think, if people are interested in getting together and talking about these things. So with that, I'm going to introduce Miss Miata Hunter, our principal, who's going to talk for a second, and then we're going to jump right into Lisa Vehe and David Peak.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say good evening. I'm excited to hear the presentation. I've heard that it's a great one. So looking forward to the presentation with David and Lisa this evening, and also excited about this series. I'm kind of calling it the why, the what, and then the how for these three weeks. So welcome to the PTO speaker series, and I'm going to pass it over to Lisa and David. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Appreciate it.
And just a reminder to anyone who just jumped on, this is going to be recorded, or it is being recorded.
So Lisa, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. I am Lisa Vehe, but I'm going to introduce Mr. Peak, and then Mr. Peak, I'll have you introduce me. I'll pop the slides up in a second when you're introducing me. Mr. Peak has been a part of the Shaker community now for 6 years. So he has been at the high school long enough to see students graduate. One of the high points of his career, I'll invent for him, but we've talked about this, was actually announcing names at our in-person graduation for the class of 2019, which I think is one of the things that when you study equity, as David has done, the saying of your name becomes one of those most important things. And David really steps into the responsibility of knowing kids well, but knowing the systems and structures and routines of Shaker well. And that is why he's gotten so invested and involved in equity here. He is right there, very present for students, but also as my co-chair in the Equity Task Force that passed an educational equity policy just over 2 years ago. Just over 2 years ago now, February 2019. David's also been working to disrupt and rebuild Shaker as a place that centers educational equity, removing multiple barriers to student success. David also loves music. He has a great voice and he's an amazing uncle.
Well, that was a lot. Thank you all for having both Lisa and I tonight. Again, my name is David Peak. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I don't know that we were planning to do introductions in that way, but Lisa, thank you for that introduction. Lisa Vehe is probably one of the few people that really doesn't need an introduction, because you know who Lisa is and you know of Lisa's work, because Lisa has probably the strongest motor for this work that I've ever seen. Much of what I do is because I'm sometimes Lisa's passenger in in her car of just being this force. And when you're connected to Lisa, you just have to be involved and have to work, because she's extremely passionate. And I'd like to say I think that a lot of the equity work that we've done in Shaker has been largely driven by Lisa Veje, and her passion and desire to see this happen. So thank you, Lisa. And I'd also like to acknowledge the person in the center of this photo that she's pulling back up. The person that's in the center is Erica Merritt. And some of you may be familiar with Erica. Erica is the founder of Equius. It is a firm wherein she and her colleagues educate equity champions. So I first met Erica, I guess it was 2017, and a friend called and said, "Hey, I have tickets to the Cavs game." It was a very cold night. I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to the Cavs game tonight." And then Lisa calls and says, "Can you go and attend an equity workshop called Leading for Equity?" And I said, "Yes, I can go attend the workshop." So I went to attend this workshop, and they didn't even know who I was. They didn't know that I was from Shaker, that we were considering hiring this firm. And I was blown away with the work that Eric and her colleague did that night. So her influence is really permeated throughout our work and our policy. So I just want to acknowledge her as well. And we can go to the next
Hang
slide.
on. There we go.
So I think it's important first to make sure that we have a common understanding of what equity is. It sounds simple, but it's an important thing to do, because even in educational spaces, I hear equity and equality used interchangeably. They are different words with different meanings. This is how we define equity in Shaker. We define equity as differentiated from equality, as giving each student access to the resources they need to learn and thrive. We understand equality to be giving everyone the same. That is not what equity is. I like to think of equity as really good parenting. I am not a parent. Most of you don't have to go back. I'm not a parent, but most of you on this call, probably all of you, are parents. And you would know that you at different times would give different attention and a different level of focus to different children, because they're all different. So you can start to frame equity as really good parenting. This is taken from our district equity policy. I'll read it. Educational equity is based on the principles of fairness and justice in allocating resources, opportunity, treatment, and creating success for most students. So I know you call it that. For each student, achieving equity means students' identities will not predetermine or predict school success. I want to pause here for 1 second. As a high school counselor, when a student walks into my office, based on their appearance, I have a general idea of what courses they're going to take. Yes, I said that. So the truth, we may as well tell the truth. It's after 7:00 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. That's our reality. And with educational equity, we don't want that to be the reality. We want a system in which a student's orientation, a student's gender, a student's race is not a predictor of their success.
Mic drop. Right? So this is see change work for a school, for a community, for a system. This is change work. And to do change work well, we want to have the opportunity to connect with each other, to know each other, to talk about the discomfort and to talk about the ahas and to talk about the celebrations as well. So we're going to put folks in Zoom breakout rooms. I know it might be tricky for folks to find a way to connect, but you know, if you can just get there, I put 3 or 4 people in each room. Hopefully 2 people can unmute at any given time. You're only going to be in there for about 8 minutes total. We want you to just do, you know, your 10-second introduction. I'm Lisa Bay. Hey, I have a high schooler, right? I'm Mr. Peak. I'm a counselor, really fast. And then bounce into sharing your personal reflections. Even if we're not all on the same page, when we're talking with each other, we're building community. We're getting to know each other. And when we build that fabric, we can do hard things like change. So what do we want you to talk about? What's about that difference between equity and equality? And when right now in America, March 3rd, 2021, when we're thinking about equity, we can't help but think about what's been happening in DC, in Columbus, in our own neighborhoods, around racial violence, around health disparities, around community challenges. So we know that each of us comes with both the burden and opportunities that we bring tonight. And we invite that conversation. So you're going to see a timer timing down, counting down for 8 minutes. And then you'll have 1 minute left. So we'll have 9 minutes total just to have this short conversation. It'd be so terrific if we were in a room together, but we're not. So we're going to try and create that via Zoom. Wait for Zoom to bring you back. Take those full 9 minutes so the 3 or 4 people that are in the room can actually have this conversation. And we'll bring you back in just a bit. Hopefully, you'll have the chance to use both your listening skills and your talking skills when we're together in these rooms. Okay, rooms are opening up now. Click on the link or Zoom will take you there automatically in just a couple seconds. Okay, thank you, friends, for being willing to have a conversation with a stranger. We ask students to do that all the time in school. Sometimes we call it turn and talk, or sometimes we used to get up and have kids do it on the wall, chalk talk, that's called. So this idea of being able to talk about how we're feeling and what we're thinking and about what we're learning, that's very much a quality of IB as well. So we're super excited to have folks do that as adults. And thank you for the middle school PTO for being willing to let us break people into groups to do this kind of stuff as well. I'm just going to stop my share just for a second. We're pretty good for time. Does anyone have, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 brief share out reflections. Does anyone feel, we call in equity spaces, we don't call it, does anyone feel safe enough to share? We say, does anyone feel brave enough to just, I can give you like 60 seconds to bring some other voices and energy into the room. Anyone want to share? This is called wait time, right, Mr. Peak?
Yeah.
Jumping in real quick.
Yes.
Right.
Up, Kevin, were you going to jump in?
My name is,
No, we're good.
No. Kevin, we can't hear you.
I'm trying to
He's trying to do something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys? Okay, well,
I'm going to stop your video. We lost him. Okay. Anyone want to try? Anyone want to also try besides Kevin? Don't be shy. This is the tech world we're living in.
Mhm.
Well, Mr. Peak, we're not going to cold call. So let's move on, okay? I wouldn't dare cold call a parent at 7:30 on a
can I
long
try
week.
one more time? Can you
Yes,
guys?
that's much better, Kevin. Thank you. Thanks for not
Okay.
giving up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just jumping back in. I was in the chat room with two young ladies, and we had a pretty good conversation, just talking about the equity piece, and how we had noticed that the code word equity has been being used a lot, and what we have saw with equity from our conversation was that a lot of it was lack of knowledge inside of Shaker. And what we have noticed is that the squeaky wheel parents who participate and advocate for their children, part of PTO and different organizations within the system, get information that those parents who are not part of those things do not get. And so their students find out that you could sign your student into classes. You can get on different teams. There's just information that goes out that if you're not a part of the end, then you won't know. And that right there hurts some of the equity.
Yep. I love that you're using that phrase, code word equity. I actually just dropped another link into the chat. We've got the presentation from tonight. I'll drop that in one more time too. And here's one thing that is important for us to think about as a community. We actually define equity, what we mean by equity, in the policy. And that's going to help us stretch some muscles. That's going to help us get to the same page without anybody having to be the bad guy or the good guy, but really norming up being, when we hear some dissonance, being able to say, I don't want to call you out, but let me call you in. When we're thinking about equity, when it comes to schools, when it comes to Shaker schools, we actually have a really normed up way of talking about that. And it helps eliminate that blame game from folks not totally getting it. So so the equity policy actually helps build some muscle for us to define equity collectively and define it well. Not perfectly. Gosh, if only there was a perfect equity policy, but it helps us define it well. And that's Kevin, this idea that we've got a history of opportunity hoarding. We have a history of some grabbing. And I think David and I are going to share a bit more about that. So let me, Toshiba, I just saw you unmute. You want to share? I was, when I was saying, I'm surprised at all the quiet voices. So thank you to unmute.
Yes, what I would say, I just sort of want to share what I shared in my breakout group, which is, I don't think that we have a challenge with the language. I don't think that there is a lack of understanding around that. I think people are quite familiar and quite knowledgeable about the language. What I do believe there is a challenge with is what it's gonna cost. And the issue with equity in particular in Shaker, as I have had conversations with many of parents, is that they don't want to pay the cost. In order to have equity, it's gonna cost us something. And Stacey Wren, she did a phenomenal job of articulating this. It costs your comfort. It costs our comfort to embrace what we desire for equity. And when we talk about injustice in our country, it is about comfort and privilege. And so I think that I just want to add that to the conversation of, if we're going to move towards equity, majority culture, my white brothers and sisters are going to have to say, hey, I'm willing to pay this price. I'm willing to to say, let's let go of detracking for the sake of the common good of everyone and for everybody's flourishing. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Toshiba. And I want to name that a good way to enter that work of being more uncomfortable, and I 120% agree with you, is to get to some of this awesome professional learning that Erica Merritt's doing, to get to some of the stuff that that the district is hosting with Dr. Wilder, to find your church or community group or women's group place of worship that's pulling some racial equity, racial justice training forward. Show up to some of the stuff we're doing in Shaker through the city around this stuff. It is change work. And I appreciate you recognizing that the change that's necessary might be different based on our age, on our race, on whether we have kids in the district, our gender, our sexuality. This is the work. So thank you for pushing us forward into it so gracefully. Mr. Peak, a thought before I push us a little into some of the data we have?
Actually, I was just thinking, Toshiba and I spoke before, and I'm realizing like, oh, yes. And I hope that we can reconnect after this conversation, because we were planning some really exciting things, and I don't know that you knew about them. So hopefully we get a chance to connect after this.
Awesome.
Yeah,
yes, connections. That's what we're doing tonight. Okay, so we're going to spend about 10 minutes on data. Mr. Peak, you got a story to tell, so I'm going to move us through pretty quickly on my slides. Part of the sense of urgency that we should have for change can come from data. Doesn't have to be the only place, but it can come from data. So first, if you prefer a narrative story about Shaker's story, we've curated some of the national news stories for you that you might want to read, starting way back in the 60s, then taking us through the 90s, the early 2000s, and then more recently. Think about how you like to learn. If you're a history person, if you're a reader, this might be a great way for you to unpack some of the content of Shaker's history. I also want to shout out the Shakerite, a wonderful news source. Even if you don't have kids at the high school yet, please show up at the high school for the Shakerite. Follow them, read their news. This is a wonderful, it supports our youth and gives us really important information. Please watch what the district's creating for us. We had Black student voices, Black staff voices, a board work session where we heard from SCORE students and MAC scholars. I also want to let you know, can't make it to a board meeting? I know my Tuesday nights get hectic. The League of Women Voters types up notes for not just our school board meetings, but for city meetings as well. Being an informed citizen, that's another important data point. But I want to look at some student learning data too. So every spring, our students take the MAP assessment, and they also take state tests. And one of the data points, one of many data points we can look at is unpacking. When students take, those fourth grade students take that MAP test in the spring, and we look at that data by race or socioeconomic indicators, what % of students are on the pathway to score proficient on the Ohio State test? Now, this means you need to take a leap of faith that the NWEA folks are doing a good job on proficiency, that MAP matters, that the state assessment matters. These are all leaps of faith. This is just one data point, right? So I'm going to blow this data up a little bit because it's gotten small because we're getting actually several years data. And you can see that consistently, over 90% of our white fourth graders are scoring high enough on MAP that they're slated to score proficient. And then we have a range, but always a lower percentage in our Black students. That same things happens. This is our MAP data. On the right-hand side is our school report card data. Remembering we didn't take state tests in spring 2020. So this is taking us back to 2019. And we look at this district-wide data around, hey, what's happening? You can score over 100 points on this test. It's a little bit tricky because the state gives you more points the higher up you get. It seems a little bit strange. But that PI index, which is not, I believe last year 112 was the, or 2019, 112 was the highest amount possible. We can see that white students are outscoring on this measure and on this measure their Black counterparts. And when we look at economic advantage versus disadvantage, kids who come to school and qualify for free and reduced lunch are not scoring as high as students who do not qualify for free and reduced lunch. This is just one measure. No, just two measures here. State report card and map, okay? Plus qualitative stories, plus what's happening in our board meetings, lots of things to consider. Mr. Peak, take us into the high school.
So this particular data set, I think, is one that's important because it actually exemplifies what we're trying to accomplish in equity work. So in the 10th grade at the high school, you can take 2 AP courses. You could take AP US History or AP Biology. You can see that in the 2015-16 school year, 4.9% of Black students were enrolled in at least one AP course, 1 in 20. 62.8% of our white students were enrolled in at least one AP course. And then students with IEPs, 3.7%. So overall, 30.5% of our students were enrolled in at least one AP course. Can we just for 1 second, just look at that 4.9 and that 62.8, just those two numbers. Sit with it. Just sit with that. That is beyond staggering. Wow. So moving forward, we see that the following year, the percentage of Black students that are enrolled in at least one AP course, the percentage goes up to 7.6%. Still a very small number, but it is an increase of better than 50%. While for white students, the increase is greater and goes to 70.7%. No students with IEPs were enrolled in at least one AP course in that year. And I'll speak to that in a minute. But what happened from the 15-16 school year to the 16-17 school year, it caused a greater than 50% increase in AP enrollment for Black students? Well, I like to joke that in the 15-16 school year, the high school hired a Black male counselor. His name was David Peak. He was in his first year at Shaker. And he'd like to pat himself on the back for that, but that's not really what happened. That's not the why. But in that 15-16 school year, we first implemented the Bridges program. And the Bridges program targeted students of color that demonstrated potential for AP IB coursework. So that was targeted intervention for students with identified potential. That happened over the summer. So in the fall of the 16-17 school year, you have an increase of greater than 50% for Black students. And You can see the numbers for 17-18 and 18-19, which to me kind of demonstrate that we have to maintain that diligence. We have to maintain that energy because we can quickly see the decrease. We can't just simply celebrate 16-17 and then the numbers drop back off. But one of the things that I saw in that year, and this is important to note, the AP US History class, very, very popular course. I actually attended a Mac Scholars meeting last week, and one of my students said to the rest of the scholars, I think everybody should take AP US History because of the way it trains you to be disciplined and be consistent. I remember him using the phrase, no days off. So that's just a sidebar. But in that AP US History class that was now more inclusive, by Thanksgiving break, every year, we have a good number of students that drop the course. The course is very challenging. It is the first time that students are charged with having to read for a class every day. And when I say every day, I mean 7 days of the week. By Thanksgiving of that 16-17 school year, not a single student had dropped AP US History. 0. I'd never seen it before. No students dropped. Another thing that the teachers told me was there's a film that they watch in the class, and they typically watch this film in the small auditorium. And there's a certain part of the film where something, one of the characters in history, something positive happens and there's a victory. And for the first time, this moment in the film, the students cheered and applauded. And it seems like something really small, but what I got from that was the students began to have a different experience when it was a more inclusive environment. There was a different energy. Different students brought different energies to the class. None of the students wanted to, no, after the Thanksgiving holiday, there were a few students that dropped, but for us to get to November 25th and not a single student drop AP US History, never happens, but it did that year. And the experience was just different for the student participants in that class. So I gave a lot of thought to that. I think it enriches all students. And then also on that slide, Lisa, could you put the slide back up? Did we lose it? Okay, so also on that slide, I have concern for the students with IEPs, and just remembering to think about, as we celebrate success, we have to remain diligent in making sure that we're pushing our students, making sure that we don't just say, oh, we have a religious program and that's enough. We have to continue to push. You can go to the next slide. So looking at our behavioral data, and again, this is from 2015, you can see that year, 52% of our student enrollment at the high school were Black students. So just over half. But then when you look at the in-school suspensions, and there were 82 of them that year, about 83% of the in-school suspensions were given to Black students. That's significant. Let's go to the next slide. Now, you can see that for out-of-school suspensions, although Black students only comprise about 52% of the population of the enrollment, about 90% of out-of-school suspensions were given to Black students. And going a step further, only Black students were expelled. Only Black students were expelled. I said early a student's race, a student's gender should not be predictors. Based on this data, a student being Black is a predictor. And that's what we are fighting to move away from. Go to the next slide. And this is from Jeremiah Caver. And Jeremiah, I believe is maybe a sophomore. Is he a sophomore now in college? Probably a sophomore.
He is a sophomore now, class of 2019.
So he also served as a student on the Equity Task Force with us. And this is something, a quote from Jeremiah that was lifted from the Shakerite. Lisa mentioned the Shakerite earlier. He said, and with regard to teachers addressing him in some of the accelerated classes, they talk to you like you won't understand the way they talk to the rest of the class. He sees information being taught to his white friends at a fast pace, but the teacher will explain the information to him slowly as if he wouldn't be able to understand it otherwise. Speaking to his experience in the classroom, Black students do segregate themselves in the classroom because if there's only 2 or 3 Black kids, they think we got to stick together. Corin Manning echoes the same sentiment. She's now a sophomore in college as well. She says in her high school experience, she felt alone because of such segregation. I felt completely isolated. It was just me and this other Black boy, and we would just sit together and try to help each other with the work. Nobody else wanted to help us. I was kind of scared to ask for help. Her experience. And then finally, Nasir Rashid, who's now a sophomore and at the Naval Academy, said
Air Force.
I'm sorry, Air Force, and I know that well. I just talked to his parents Saturday. One of 2 Black males in his grade in the IB diploma program. It makes me feel bad because I want to have other people that look like me in these classes. Again, him, because he was my student, we can look at students as counselors and think it is not likely that Nasir and Corin and Jeremiah will be in these upper level classes based on their skin color. And that should not be a predictor.
So the Equity Task Force was formed, and we had a very clear charge to review data, to get to know this data and the stories of kids, of the community, of families, of educators, of principals, to know that well enough to ensure that we put a policy in front of the board. And this is now the board approved policy. In Shaker, our board reads a policy 3 times before they vote on it. This is our educational equity policy. It was revised in November of 2019 in order to remove gender pronouns. So now that was the only change in November. So again, this policy is now 2 years old. I'm going to walk you through the first part. The first paragraph really lays out that the board believes that all Shaker students should be held to high expectations and given the resources and supports they need to exceed those expectations. In this paragraph, the policy talks about all students, every student, all students, all students. You see the language repeated again and again in this opening paragraph about setting us on a course to really think about the success of more than just some students, but all students. The second paragraph is an important one because it recognizes that the district and our community inherited a system that was not working. I'm just going to read this first sentence out loud. Historical and continuing structural inequities create disparate outcomes for marginalized student populations. There is more at play than just the schools and We are, as a school system, we're going to combat those. And when David talks about what should not be a predictor of your success, we have a long list here in Shaker that we're committed to that includes race, right? Because that is a long time differentiator of student success. Shouldn't be, but is in our district. But also origin, religion, sex, gender, economic status, pregnancy, disability of students and families. We want to ensure as a district in this policy that we name those barriers and we organize to pull them down so that all students can be successful. This does not mean that we overvalue some students' success. It means that we want everyone to be successful. It's Toshiba said, a new way of thinking that requires us to rewire a bit to move this work forward. The district in the third paragraph recognizes that we want to meet all students where they are. And we then go further to name 3 levers that we will use. And I want to really articulate those. The board must set guiding principles in place to reflect the district values around budget, resource allocation, and policy development. Those are the 3 things the board should be focused on changing the way we spend money, changing the way we allocate people, time, and dollars, 3 important resources that we have, and looking at our policies, the good and the bad policies that either help move our equity work forward or create a barrier and create change. In order to do this work, which is very aspirational and very powerful, the board adopted guiding principles to help them do that. And I'm going to let David walk us through these.
Thanks, Lisa. So you see principle number 1, the policy will guide our board decisions to help students get to their full potential. This policy is guiding the decisions. Number 2, equity benefits the entire district. It's not simply a benefit to students that are marginalized. It is a benefit to everyone. Number 3, equity does not mean equal. We have to come back to that because I hear those words used interchangeably and used incorrectly. So we want to make sure that we're always aware of that. And then for targeted universalism, it's targeted universalism is on another slide. And I want to take a quick moment to talk about it because when I mentioned the Bridges program provided support over the summer for students that had potential to excel in accelerated courses. So taking resources and targeting them to those students, and then throughout the school year, continuing to provide resources for those students, giving them access to teachers, helping them to formulate study groups, helping them to structure review sessions for exams. That support was targeted to those students with the goal of raising the achievement of all. That's really what targeted universalism is. So that's number 4. And that's really, maybe I want to say that one of the bedrock principles of our equity policy. At least I don't think we really need to talk about the roles and responsibilities. But I wanted to make sure that we touched 1 through 4.
And I'm going to pop in on number 7 to give us something to think about as a community. It is important to recognize that as a district and as citizens of Shaker, our district and through Dr. Glasner, whoever our superintendent is at any time, should be setting goals and measuring our success against those goals. And as we went through our presentation today, that data might include surveys of student experiences, learning data on both formative and summative data points, discipline data that we actually have a lot of power over in the state of Ohio, and how the Office of Civil Rights collects, so that we actually can think about the kind of data we want to create, we want to collect, and we want to analyze and use to make our experiences better. What is important to note, though, is that there should be metrics connected to this that our community is aware of and talking about. And that's a really important piece. Clearly, David and I are super passionate about sharing this data story, and we're grateful that others want to learn about it and ask about it as well. It becomes, our work becomes easier when we're working together to ask hard questions and to understand. David, I'm just going to share screen one more time, so that if maybe you want to share about the targeted universalism resources that are here in the presentation deck, and then I'll take us to some action items that folks might take.
Sure. So you really, if you get a chance, you'd like to just watch the video on targeted universalism. Really simple concept, difficult sometimes for people to accept. And Toshiba spoke about the discomfort. Sometimes people are uncomfortable about the idea of one group getting resource, because they're feeling like, oh, you're taking resource away from my child. But the goal is for everyone to rise. Everyone is better when we're able to target our supports. And then also, you see the Madison, Wisconsin School District's efforts. We're a part of the Minority Student Achievement Network. We're actually a founding member of the Minority Student Achievement Network, and the office is based in Madison, Wisconsin. But there are some other districts in the network that are further along with the equity work that we're doing now. So there are other districts that have already adopted equity policies when we were getting started. So we're able to kind of lean on them, and not always having to reinvent, but sometimes looking and say, okay, what did they do over in Wisconsin? What did they do in Cleveland Heights? I think Cleveland Heights may be the only other district in Ohio, but we want to make sure that as a district, we're utilizing our resources to make the work go forward. And then also, if you want to look at the glossary that you see at the bottom, just to familiarize yourself with the terms, getting used to those, because our goal is to build equity champions, and you want to make sure that you're fluent in the language of equity.
And if you're looking for some specific action items, and maybe we can ask PTO leaders to share this out, there are so many ways to get involved through community builders, SAM, SCORE. There are really powerful parenting podcasts. The next Waking Up White book club for folks who want to unpack what it means to build the muscle to be a stronger co-conspirator or stronger ally. You can join groups of Shaker folks reading that book. The city has also invested in their first DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion hire. And you can read more about the work that subgroup in Shaker, which will soon be a committee of the city focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, is doing. There's the link to MSAN if you're interested in learning more about their work, the section of the Shaker Schools webpage. And I know that there's more coming on de-leveling or untracking. And I can't help, I'm an educator in my, when I'm not a Shaker volunteer. And one of my heroes in this space is an excellent educator in Boston named Kim Parker. And there's a hot link there to learn more about the de-tracking work that she advocates for. And I've learned a ton from her on de-leveling. Thank you from David and I for spending an hour with us tonight to learn and connect. And it's a couple minutes after 8, but we're happy to stick around if any folks do have questions about the equity policy. But I'm hoping maybe Emily will say one more time what the upcoming sessions are.
So our next session, we're going to have Dr. John Moore, who's the IB coordinator at the high school, and we're going to talk about where the pathways lead. I feel like a lot of middle school parents have no idea where these course pathways lead and why their child is on the path. And I keep telling the story that my college sophomore followed the advanced math path and got to her senior year and called me and said, "Why am I taking BC Calculus? I don't need this class to get into med school." And I said, "I have no idea. We just followed the path." And so next week is, what are the paths and where do they lead? What does the high school have to offer? And then the week after that, we are talking about instructional practices in the classroom at the middle school. We're going to have teachers come and talk about how they differentiate instruction in the classroom, share some of their lessons, talk about how IB informs differentiated instruction and how it's necessary. It's very similar to the program that was just done at Woodbury. And I can put that information on that program in the chat. They did a really, really great presentation called Debunking De-Tracking that has been recorded and is great. So those, I'm looking forward to those 2 next sessions. And I really appreciate David and Lisa, you coming and talking to us about equity. And as Miata said, this is the why are we doing this work? You know, why? And I think I'm a longtime Shakerite. I'm an alum. You know, my oldest child graduated in 2012. I've been at the high school a long time. And much of this was a shock to me, to be honest, really. Like, I was in my little bubble and I didn't really realize how that affected other people. And so the learning about everyone's experience and you know, how my reality isn't everyone's reality, right? Like, this why piece of equity, I think, is really, really crucial. And next week, it's, you know, sort of what is happening and where are the pathways, and then the how is the 3rd week. So I'd love to, if people have questions, I think that'd be great to answer a few just for a couple, like 5 minutes or something before we go.
Hi, this is more of like a logistical question, but I'm so happy to see, my name is Courtney. I have a 7th grader at the middle school, and I'm an involved parent at the middle school. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry, that was me. That was my fault.
Oh, that's okay. I was just wondering, like, I love seeing all of your faces, but how do we get more people here, right? Like, we put it on, we put it in the newsletter, we put it on Facebook, we send to circulation through our email chat of our pod groups. I think these are such amazing presentations, and I really think the more people who see them, the more important it is, the more we can help all be advocates. We will have like shared language. So how do we continue, you know, for those of us who attend, how do we, you know, maybe all of us can take the step of sending this presentation or just encouraging people to watch this recording. I know I will share it with our pod group, but if we could all do that, share it with, you know, a handful of friends, I think that would go a long way. But I don't know if Lisa and I don't know if David, I don't know if you have any suggestions, but
I'll
it's just a thought.
I'll just name one thing that builds off what you said, Courtney, and that's that all of us are join community when someone personally reaches out to us and says, hey, do you know about this? Or can I share this with you? Or, you send it to a small chat group, or you see someone at Heinen's or Dave's or Trader Joe's or wherever you're out grocery shopping. And COVID makes it hard because we're in masks and you're just like, is that person or is that not that person? And I think what we need to continue to do is, if you're someone who's showing up, keep showing up. When you stay in this space, you learn that the right people in the room are the right people in the room. So the people who show up are the people that are meant to be there that night. And that's a good thing. So we don't have to worry about the numbers per se. But what we can think about is, what are the actions that we all take? Who are 3 people that you could share this with and connect with, and let them know who's showing up at the, here's the next one. Here's the next link to, to come to the next event. We'd love to have you come. David, other ideas about how you see momentum built in Shaker for these conversations?
I really think that what you said is on target. I think it's the personal connection. I know for myself as a counselor, that's so important. Just reaching out to folks. Where students and families tell me all the time, they're inundated with emails. They're getting so many emails. If you send me another, if they're just not going to read them. So I don't know that that's really the vehicle anymore to really reach folks. It has to be that phone call, that text. Please come to this. And as you become more comfortable with the language and with the things that were shared, you can then share those things in conversation, in passing. So if they never watch a presentation, they may never give 60 minutes to this work or to this learning, but they may give you 2 minutes. So take that time and really try to connect with folks.
Someone just DM'd me, so I'm putting this into the chat for upcoming sessions. The language we use at the high school is basically a second language about how we talk about classes. And if you didn't come in Shaker, you have to learn that language. So as we get to sessions with Dr. Moore or the 3rd session, thank you for the question, but making sure that you start to define AP, IB, honors, core, and the terms tracking, detracking, which I spelled wrong, and levels. So if someone can just make a note of that as you look ahead and share that with Dr. Moore, to make sure that those that question gets answered about this sort of, our Shakerified language that might not be familiar, especially if you don't yet have a kid at the high school. Great
And
question.
Also in our breakout room, there was a comment that, are we even going to have AP and IB courses at the high school? Aren't those tracks, and aren't those going to be abolished? And the answer is no. They may be tracks, but they are not going to be abolished.
Right. What we're actually doing, what the equity policy challenges us to do, is open up doors, not close doors. Okay. So think of it that way. Opening up opportunity.
Can I be heard? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Jumping back in. Again, my name is Kevin Lowry. I'm the co-president of this PTO as well. I want to thank David and Lisa for coming out. And I had 2 things that I wanted to ask about. One, David, my wife said that if you hadn't written that letter, for you to stay on after we finish with this meeting. That's an inside joke. And 2, I'm still stuck on the numbers that you showed. And I know we're ending this meeting, but the 70% and the 4%. And when we're looking at the students who are inside of those upper level classes and the students that are not inside of those upper level classes. And so one of the things that we've been having a conversation about is that 70% of the white students that are inside of those classes and the 4% of African Americans that are in the classes and the rest that's not. How many of that 70% have the district found shouldn't be there. Because what we find is that our white counterparts, they, when those MAP scores come out and they send out the letters saying that your children didn't make it into the MAP, into the upper level classes, the African-American parents who are here in Shaker say, well, I would like my children to go in the upper level classes, and they're told they didn't test in. And then that 70% are those white parents who say, I don't care if my children tested in or not, I want them inside of those upper level classes. And so then those children are there at 70% in those classes. And a lot of those students who did not test in are having trouble now that they're in high school. How many of those students have they found, or have that even been looked at from an equity position, that maybe a lot of those students shouldn't even be in upper level classes and cause a stress on the district themselves?
Emily, are we still recording?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Kevin, you just said what people don't want to talk about. And I wasn't prepared to talk about that. And I'm not sure that I really can talk about that the way that I'd like to, but that's an issue. That's an issue. It's real. Thank you for raising that. And I don't know how I want to respond to it right now.
We can get into that later. We can get into that.
I won't, but I think it's important for everyone to be heard. And I think it's important that when you're considering these things, that you raise those conversations in these environments, outside these environments. We want to, oh man, that's a lot. So I can't really speak to it right now, but we'll hopefully, as we become more comfortable, we can find a way to have more honest conversations about how we're navigating and helping parents to embrace discomfort. I keep hearing Tashiva saying discomfort, and we need to have some real conversations about what's happening. And I've been seeing it this is my 15th year in education. I've been seeing it for a very, very long time. I was a middle school counselor at one time, and I would work with, we would schedule the elementary students that were coming up to the middle school. And I saw a lot of things that people don't want to talk about. So I don't think we're going to talk about them tonight, Kevin, but thank you for raising that. And I hope that that we can push that conversation forward very soon.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm going to just add, I'm just going to add one thing to that, because I actually think it's really important for white people to respond in this space, to say, white friends on this call, I hope you will think about the learning that you need to do in order to decrease your hoarding of opportunity in Shaker. And we must help each other do that. And I'm committed. So if you want to walk and talk or go for a coffee, if you want to read despite the best intentions and talk about it with me, or join another book club, but we have work to do in order to change the way we interact with the district, in order to ensure that when this change, which has already started, of moving towards equity happens, we don't, despite our best intentions, get in the way of real equity. And this will be change work. John Diamond spoke at MSAN, the organization David talked about. You can Google him and listen to him talk about writing this book with all of the MSAN districts right there with him in Madison pre-COVID. Amanda Lewis is a professor at University of Illinois at Chicago. She is in front of this work. They are both voices talking a ton about this exact issue. And we must learn to be more informed champions for equity in real, tangible ways, not just in name only.
Thanks, Lisa. I needed some help there, so I appreciate it. I can always
And
count.
Miata, if you want to jump in and close us out, I think Lisa also said it best, though. This is, and David, both, this is about raising everyone up. It's not about cutting off opportunities to people. It's about providing opportunities to people. And, you know, I think there's a lot we can talk about in that, but we're 20 minutes over already. So, Miata, do you want to, do you have anything to say in closing, or?
So I was just going to say actually something similar to what you just said and what Lisa said about opportunity and opening opportunity for all of our students, and hopefully that when the work that we are starting to do now, it will continue when we look at this data point 2 years from now for our 8th graders and 3 years from now for our current 7th graders at the middle school, that those numbers will be increased for our Black students. So it won't be a 4.9 or a 7.2 or 7.6, that because we are raising the high expectations for all of our students, and also providing them the education, the strategies, the skills that they need to be successful in AP classes, that I'm excited to see that increase, right? For all of our students, because we know that they're all going to be, hopefully prepared for that level of work. So I just want to thank everyone. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lisa.
Just really quick, when is the next session?
It is next Tuesday, the 9th at 7 p.m.
Next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Tell a friend.
And
Okay, Miata, thank you. Sorry.
That's the one about the high school pathways, the courses, what's offered at the high school, which is just unbelievable what's offered there. The art, the music, like there are so many ways to be successful. And I feel like when it's your first child, you have no idea what's to come and how amazing it is. So I really want to share that, and I'm excited about that. And then I'm even more excited about the 15th, when we talk about instructional practices and what's going on in our classrooms at the middle school and how everybody is getting what they need. And I sent the link to the Woodbury presentation in the chat, and I hope everybody got that link, because it's going to disappear as soon as we log off. So click it now, and then it'll just be there in your tabs. So I appreciate, David and Lisa, everything that you've brought to this presentation. I think it's been really helpful and enlightening, and I hope everybody understands the why of what we're doing or what's going on in the district. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for having us. Emily, I'll send you the video it'll probably take about an hour.
Okay.
Okay.
I will put the video on the Facebook page.
Yes.
Great.
Good night, all.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Yes.
Thank you.